Today I'm speaking with Alex and Tim Porter of ModTech Labs. Prior to starting their company, Alex and Tim worked in AR and VR, collectively known as XR, in the entertainment and gaming industries. Today we discuss augmented reality, virtual reality, including technical issues with XR, including user-level issues such as super-realism. We also discuss some of the more positive and encouraging use cases for AR and VR. With that, please enjoy my conversation with Alex and Tim Porter. Welcome to the RSnake Show. Today we have with us Alex and Tim Porter. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. How are
Fantastic.
You guys are kind of an interesting pair. You are my first husband and wife duo here. How does that feel, first of all? Working together. Is that still married?
Yes.
Still married.
As a matter of fact.
Doing this about 8 years now. Coming up.
Yeah. Pandemic. You can't leave the house, and married and working together.
With children.
With the children, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Young children, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, they're not going to school. They're staying there asking every 15 minutes, Daddy.
Everyone asks about work-life balance. I just call it work-life fusion. It's just all mixed together.
I give up that concept a long time ago.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your company, ModTech Labs, and kind of how it came to be? I think a lot of people will be interested in this, actually.
Absolutely. So ModTech Labs is an automated platform. We intake photos and videos and create 3D digital content. And so this content is used sort of across digital mediums, everything from 360 views all the way into augmented and virtual reality use cases, and even into some of the NFT and 3D versions as well. So we're seeing a lot of interesting, cool use cases sort of come out of the woodworks. And we come from the XR space. So we actually ran our own augmented and virtual reality studio for 5 years prior to launching this company.
And my understanding was that was a big problem in the industry, was that it's hard to do what you're trying to do. So it's not, in a typical world, if I want to get a 3D model, I have to build up a 3D model. And that is very time intensive and slow and ugly and error prone and very specialized skill. But what you guys can do is take photos of a existing thing that exists in the real world, like a rock, let's say, and just take a bunch of photos of it, and now you have a rock, and you don't have to do any extra stuff.
100%. Yeah, that's the biggest thing when you're talking about any sort of digital medium. Content creation is extremely expensive. And that was one of the big things that we ran in as we were running Underminer Studios, which was the last company we were at, is that we would work for major corporations, people like Intel, Microsoft, KPMG, and things like that. And they would come to us and they'd be like, hey, can you guys do this really cool project? And as we continue doing bigger and cooler projects, not necessarily did the budgets get bigger, we got more marketing potential. At one point in time, almost about 6 months, we were the actual YouTube ad for Intel. So we were like, us talking and everything like that, and it's all popping up. It was great, but obviously, the biggest thing when you're talking about project is bigger, but the budget isn't bigger. That means that you're starting to cut in. So we started making more and more tools, and that goes to my background, was building automated tools and things like that. And so
can we talk about XR? Can you talk about the difference between AR and VR, just so that everyone, because not everyone who's listening is going to be up on all these terms. So I think it's useful, just a brief primer. A lot of acronyms.
You want me to do it?
Yeah, sure. Whatever. Either
Go
way.
for it.
Sure. So the scale of immersion is the way that you think of the difference between AR, VR, and everything in between. So XR is this combination term of all of these new styles of ways that people can interact with 3D and digital content. AR is typically, and you see this with your cell phone, it's like a sticker, it's like Pokemon Go, over the world. So you end up getting the understanding, very little understanding of the real world space. You're being invited to the space. While on the flip side, you have VR. VR is entirely immersive. You live in the space. You're entirely immersed into the space. And then you end up getting places in between the two of them where you start questioning what is reality. You get like MR, which is merged or mixed reality, depending on which side of the coin, if you're on a Microsoft or Intel side of the coin. And that is the environment knows everything about you, and you know everything about the environment. So you could have a character that runs behind a screen and in front of a screen, and you could play with it, throw things at it, and it would react and interact as if it lived with you, and as if the world was part and you were part of that world at the same time.
So one of the things I thought it was very cool about your tech, and I had not seen up until that point, was this idea of 3D volumetric photogrammetry as a movie, not as a standalone object. Because what I think most people are thinking of when they think of building up a 3D model is I build up a model and then I can spin around the model or whatever. But what if the model isn't a model? What if it's an action? What if it's more like a train that's moving with all its intricacies of its engine or whatever? Or what if it's a child playing or something, like where it's very dynamic, a lot of things happening. Like there's ways to build up models using, you put little balls on people's, wrists as they run around or whatever, and you kind of build up a stick frame and then kind of overlay your existing model. But this is much more accurate because it actually looks like them. It's got all of their, pores and, their hair and all of that stuff. Like, I think the cool part is that you can make it an actual movie. You can actually rewind to the part where they jumped and like, okay, how do we model this exact part of this movie and make that thing the focal point, or actually rotate the camera to a better angle and actually capture them in a different position than the camera wasn't naturally built to be in that position.
Yeah, volumetric video is really fascinating. It's definitely still early days. It also could be called videogrammetry, right? So we look at it as videogrammetry. So you're taking images from all around, videos from all around of a performance. And so this is an on-demand style performance. So you're capturing an action, a movement, a performance, and then playing it back. So we are primarily that on-demand versus real-time in this sort of performance level. But what it really gets you is that human realism, which is really hard to achieve with any type of modeling or any type of sort of artistic human form. You get micro and macro expressions, the flushing and the lines of the human face that we are all very, very perceptive and understand clearly. You could even tell on someone who's had a lot of Botox or potentially some other facial work, that their face doesn't quite react like normal. And we are very, very attuned to that with virtual beings as well.
I'll have you know I have no Botox whatsoever, so this is all natural.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, from your perspective, I know this is kind of a super cheeseball question, but like, how far do you think we are away from things like the holodeck, right? I mean, because all of this is really going down to you maybe have to wear something in your head, which is pretty clunky. But how far do you think it is going to be till we have something maybe that we can't necessarily touch? I'm willing to give that one up. But so it looks realistic from my perspective in all the ways. It passes the uncanny valley. I can't tell that I'm in this virtual world except for the fact that I know there's an exit.
Yeah. So if you're talking about being able to walk through a space like that, we're talking about 2 years. If you're able to stand outside of a space and look inward, that's right now. So there are a couple of different places, and they're called caves, which are like doing VR, except for it's projected on the surface, and there's all of this holographic projection that can happen. And these entire experiences are, to the naked eye and even to many professionals, indistinguishable from the real world.
A good friend of mine was involved in the Harry Potter performance or whatever, the exhibition, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And I know that they built in a lot of the projection mapping stuff into that based on my recommendation, actually, like you should do this because I think it's going to turn out really good. And apparently they did. And the idea is you actually are mapping something that's truly 3D with something that's 2D on top of that thing. Do you think that's where everything's going? Do you think that's where we're heading, is a lot of, you have to actually build up a 3D thing and project on top of it? Or do you think we're actually going to get to the point where something can detect where my eyes are and where I'm looking and decide that this is the thing this eye should be seeing? Or where is that tech going, do you
We
think?
have tech at this point that can detect where people are looking and things like that. The biggest thing is being able to project into a three-dimensional space and then deal with beaming technology so that when you look into that area, that all of the different angles are played at the same time. But some of the advancements that we're seeing in like nerfs, if anybody watched NVIDIA with their conference that came out, they did what's called instant nerf, which is a massive advancement on this about 2-year-old technology. It allows for the segmentation of any of the different planes of three-dimensional existence. And so when you're talking about being able to reproject these objects into full 3 dimensions, you have the segmentations already all ready to go. Then being able to play them back to where, as you're walking around and this projector is happening, and based on the vision, it all feeds back in at the same time. Having multiple of those, then you're talking about lots more projectors, or maybe there's a much better beaming or bouncing.
I mean, we already have technology, lasers that can inject audio into your ear. It seems like something quite similar to that. That's, I mean, really, that's what any sort of monitor is doing, is it's blasting your eyes with radiation. It's just visual radiation, we don't die from it, kind of thing. But it seems like that's doable, where we would have some very specific set of beaming going on into any individual eye at a very specific frequency, a very specific rate from a specific direction, and give us whatever perspective we want. I'm just trying to figure out where this is all going. Where is that where we're going, or is it I'm going to have something on my head, or is it implanting in my brain? Or
there have been tests in beaming into people's eyes, and it's caused some issues. So somebody's going to have to advance that technology a whole bunch, or we're going to have a bunch of blind people. So that's not.
There is some movement in the lens space. So contact lenses that can allow you to do augmented reality and see sort of that interactive world, if you will, which to me feels overwhelming. I don't want that in my eye personally. But I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting use cases. There's a wide variety of ways to implement this so that we're not just inundated with advertisements every place we go, right? If there's a functional use case, if it's a training, opportunity, if it's a way to really engage or communicate more effectively with other people, that's a very different scenario in my mind than just sort of being bombarded with
or perhaps the safety stuff that happens, like you're about to dig up some sort of electrical system, or you probably should dig here, or you're about to cross the road but there's a bus coming, or there could be all kinds of interesting applications for kids, preventing them from doing potentially very dangerous things, like this person isn't on your list to pick you up, or stuff like that.
Oh yeah, that's helpful. There has been some advancements in construction technology to be able to utilize things like HoloLens and stuff like that to be able to see.
I've seen some of that,
and they've been quite successful, but they fail in all the ways that you would expect. They have to be connected to the internet. They have to be able to get data across. They have to be able to have GPS tracking. They have to be able to visualize a whole bunch of different types of data with very limited input capabilities. And so I think most of the advancements to create realism are going to be less on the visual quality and things like that, and they're going to go more towards how do we interact with the systems, because when you start having bad interactions, then you lose that whole immersion thing. And then, if you remember Nintendo, they always had really great and amazing games, and people were massively immersed in them. Now, the visual quality never matched what PlayStation could do. People didn't care. They really did enjoy and were further immersed, but it was a better interactive experience.
So have you guys seen, there's some videos out there where they have holographic concerts. Hatsune Miku in Japan, which is actually just a vocal pack. It's like a Vocaloid vocal pack that they try to sell, but as part of their marketing, I guess they decided to build this 3D model. Have you seen this? You know what I'm talking about?
Virtual influencers.
Yeah, they've actually managed to create a fully three-dimensional looking, from the audience's perspective, virtual character who's singing songs that no person has ever sang, ever. They just record whatever notes that they want and whatever lyrics they want, and suddenly you have a performance that it is sold out in Japan. Like, this is not a little thing. Have you seen anything like that? Do you think that is sort of the way things are going, where we're going to have more virtual performances, less real people doing things? Like, I get in this conversation all the time, and I really feel like people are not understanding that this is becoming like a freight train. There's all these virtual performances that are right around the corner, and that's really going to degrade the real performances, both in terms of quality, but also just cost. Yeah, I think it's going to drive down cost. I think the insurance, just dealing with, someone going up in 20 years, they had a great career, everything's fine, and all of a sudden they go up on stage and they slap a comedian, everything is fine, and you can't predict that that's going to happen. So why not just take the actor or the musician or the performer in general out of the equation, still make something that's palatable and interesting for the audience, or maybe even more visually interesting because they can do things that humans can't do, and de-risk the whole thing from an entrepreneurial perspective. That seems way better.
100%. I mean, you remember Dave Grohl, when he broke his leg, that cost millions of dollars. It's a massive cost. But as far as technology goes, you're 100% on there. NVIDIA released a face animation based on voice. So as you start to talk, it starts doing the animation that's on that. As well, they have their metahumans, which, I challenge anybody from a distance to be able to tell the difference between the two of them. And they've also allowed for people to scan people into it. So it's a metahuman, so it's a pre-created creature that can talk and walk and do all of this fun stuff. And then now they're letting you be able to scan someone's head and then put that on it and then actually does all of this stuff.
I'm taking the human out of it completely if I'm running that company, because
Yeah.
if I have somebody who's known to be a pedophile suddenly, like I use Kevin Spacey, great face, everyone likes him, everyone knows him, and all of a sudden it turns out he's doing some stuff he shouldn't be doing behind the scenes. Not that I don't like Kevin Spacey plenty for his acting skills, but I don't want that risk if I'm an entrepreneur, if I'm a studio. Just like what? Why not just go for the virtual route, especially if it can be visually close to a human?
Well, I don't think we're there with the visually close to a human yet. I don't think we're close enough to completely cut
I agree.
humans out of the scenario yet. Obviously, there's, deep fakes, but we even saw this during COVID, right? For actual physical production was not happening. And so what took place in that primarily was actual like on location productions, right? People were filming from home. We all saw the quality of those. Questionable. And then we saw a ton of uptick in animation. There were actually things that were slated to be real life, real action that were actually transitioned into animation, specifically because they could not get the, people together to do the filming. And so I think there's always going to be a little bit of everything, right? I'm a big fan of the idea that we're going to have something more along the lines of sort of a combination of mediums, right? We're going to have stylized, we're going to have traditional animation, we're going to have real world, human, digitized. There's going to be a massive like swath of things that are.
I think for a while that is absolutely true, but long term, I'm looking at the studios and they're throwing millions of dollars at their lead performers. But it's not going to cost that much to build a digital version of a person, in my opinion. Nowhere near that, maybe 100,000 or something, like literally an order of magnitude cheaper.
Yep.
And you don't have any of the downside risk, which from an economics perspective, that seems like a no-brainer to me.
100%. Actually, so
how far away do you think we are?
Oh, time-wise?
Yeah, I know you don't think it's today. I agree. But what's your feeling on the timing of that?
8 months, a year.
Really? That close?
Yeah.
I think it's further away. Further away. I don't think we're going to be able to cut humans out of the equation that quickly.
Well, we're making a digital version of them. I don't see why not.
That gets into a whole other list of rights to use digital presence of existing humans. That is,
but let's take the real human out of it. Let's build up a model that simulacrum of a human or based on thousands of humans. Yeah, there might be some horrible person in the middle of that, but no one would ever know.
Oh, no.
What do you think?
I'm like, I see 5 to 10 years probably, to be honest, because I think that it's going to be a transition of, the things that we know now, right? We have how many generations alive today, right? 5 generations is where we're at, I think 6. And so the reality is, the oldest generation is not going to let go of what they already know. I think it's going to have to be sort of a phase out approach, and it's just going to become normalized for younger generation. And so as they enter the workplace, that's where it's going to begin really.
Oh, I don't mean it would be like completely gotten rid of. I meant more like capable, like where we will have the tech necessary to do this.
I think within the next several months, you'll end up seeing in training and simulations these entirely fake individuals that look very realistic, and then moving towards entertainment, because entertainment is going to end up being a longer tail. I see within 100% within the year.
Wow.
Generative humans. Yeah, absolutely. It's already happening.
Correct.
You also agree within a year?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm like, the tech is there. The adoption is not.
You're seeing extras going away already, and they're using generative extras, using what I'm talking about with the metahumans that you're seeing from Epic.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it is already occurring.
Oh, yeah.
All right, Chris, I feel like you owe me a beer out there. All right. I've been asking a lot of people about this, so I'm glad I got some authoritative. All right. So let's talk about the limits of specifically the glasses in particular, because seems like this is really like where things are sort of stagnating right now in terms of people's adoption of it. Everyone's got these Oculus Rifts or whatever the Microsoft HoloLens or whatever version, the Galaxy, they're putting a phone on their face, literally putting a phone on their face, which just blows me away.
And several other people too.
Yeah, well, okay.
Physically.
So what do you think that the issues are? So for instance, like capturing and rendering, I think is straight in your wheelhouse. Like where are the issues there?
I can go first. So when you're talking about being able to get data easy enough, so you have a chicken and egg kind of situation when you're dealing with XR headsets. You have ones that are tethered, and you have ones that are not tethered. You have these all-in-ones. The problem that you would expect is, as you've gone away from being plugged into a computer, you start losing horsepower, and so you end up having to optimize things as things are going along, and then the headset. And so
in what way? What kind of optimizations?
Oh, exactly. So if you think about if you have a headset as the same amount of power as the cell phone that's in your pocket, for it to go ahead and render the experience, first it needs to go ahead and see where your head is in three-dimensional space. So you're moving your head up, down, left, and right, and you can walk forward and you can walk backwards as well. It's also rendering the image twice. So you have a left eye and a right eye, and then it ends up rendering that to a single image and then place it to GPU so that you can showcase it. And then the very last thing is having the assets that actually live in the scene. So by the time it gets all the way from A to Z, you've already lost about 30% of all the capability in your system just to be able to run the experience itself. And then you get to go ahead and start running these actual assets. So if you can see a game on your phone, you're like, wow, that's really amazing. Now take one of the legs, put a weight on it, and then you get what you can do in XR.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So then there's the other physical limitations. So it's one size fits all, if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So humans are built differently. There's something called interpupillary distance. So our pupils are actually spaced differently. And this does boil down to lineage, racial heritage in some cases, your sex, or your age, right? If you're a small human under 13, it's actually not recommended for you to wear VR headsets.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Just because their eyes are not quite wide enough yet.
Correct. In part. And so there's a massive amount of flexibility that is not built into these systems to accommodate for literally different head shapes and sizes. And not to mention, actual eye distance. And so that in and of itself is a problem. And that is part of what causes VR sickness, right? A lot of times people that have experienced this are very put off by it and they want nothing to do with it. However, most people have a positive experience with augmented reality, right? Typically, the vast majority of us have used it in some way, shape, or form on our phone or our tablet, whether it's projecting, an Amazon couch into our space to see what it looks like.
Sure.
Or if you're playing Pokemon Go, there's a wide variety of use cases.
As I'm known to do.
Absolutely. Got to get them all.
Pokemon.
Exactly. But I mean, there's a massive opportunity, right, for this to be iterated upon.
Mm-hmm.
And that hasn't been a focus. And up until this point, part of it is sourcing as well. How do you source all the hardware pieces and parts? It's challenging. It's a challenging market for that.
One other thing I've noticed a lot is that it doesn't seem to wrap around and give you the full 3D experience. It's sort of cut off, especially HoloLens is like really narrow for some reason, which I think is a very bizarre design choice to go live with that.
137 degrees is about the average, so it doesn't go all the way out. And that
it should be more like 180, right?
Correct. You can get a little bit lower than that, but if you really want a really good experience, like 210, because of the way light bounces on the sides, ends up helping. And actually, there was
interesting, even beyond your normal visual,
beyond your visual range, and that's because even though you cannot see and you physically can't see back there because the way light bounces from behind, you can still perceive that. And we actually saw that at CES, there was a company that was making how to save people from simulation sickness. And that's exactly what they're doing, is they're putting lights and it matched the lights that was happening in that. And it made nobody sick after that. It was really, really, really effective. But I actually have a really interesting story about simulation sickness and somebody requesting us to do that, if you'd like me to tell.
Okay.
It's already open. It's already open.
This is wacky.
Yeah. So I was working on a project, and this was for a new cancer drug that was going to come out. Don't ask why they were asking an XR company to go ahead and do that, but it was like entertainment training combination thing, and I'm like, sure, okay. And the script was, you're out in space, and then this asteroid flies by, and you're like, wow, that's so wonderful. And then you're going to fly into Earth. So immediately I'm looking at that, and there's 12, 13 laws that you don't break in XR to make people not sick. And I was like, okay, so we're going to make this nice and calm, and then we're just going to kind of take him down to Earth and put him in. And then I get on the call with the producer, and he was like, it gave me an Earl Grey, and you know what I want? I want a beer with a whiskey back. Make it happen. I was like, but you're going to make somebody sick. And he was like, no, I don't think you understand. Whiskey back. And I was like, all right, dude. And so I do everything I can. I take it and I literally do anamorphic lenses. So lens flare, it looks like J.J. Abrams, just all over this whole thing. And the story we got back was, could you put it back to the way it was? And I was like, so no. This is not how this works. What happened? And it was like, so our PM went home sick. And I was like, could you describe what happened? She said she felt like she had food poisoning. I said, that was simulation sickness. We talked about this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but never want to whiskey back people. Right. Don't do that.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, so what are some of the strategies in removing that? I mean, I know that's I certainly get it when I even just trying to play normal 3D video games, first-person shooters. I already get that, and one of the reasons I think that is the case is because they can't predict how far I am away from the screen, so they always project it the same size, whatever that size is. But it's sort of like looking through a window. You're not always looking through the window and seeing the world the way it is. As you move forward and backwards, the world is changing. But it's a window that never changes, and it makes me very ill to watch that, especially because I'm not moving with it. My inner ear isn't moving, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts about it? Like what are some tricks or whatever?
Sure. Yeah. And so I actually helped write some of the standards that were around this. We're part of CTA, which is Consumer Technology Association. I'm the chair for the XR group. And we wrote many of the different standards, things like, never try to break the vestibular feedback loop. It's just like you're saying, your inner ear doesn't feed with the same kind of experience. So, as somebody walks forward and walks back and looks left and right, their vision needs to match up. Never push anybody in many of the different laws and groups and things that come out of movies help. If you're going to cut, you want to cut and fade to black. You bring people up. You don't want to do things like moving the chair underneath them unless the chair underneath them physically moves in real life. Because as soon as you move the headset, then you break that experience. There's also things like oversaturation of color. So if you have way too bright colors or changes in color that are too much, the intensity can make a lot of people very sick. The other thing, and this is something that can help with it, is sound. So if you have sound, especially ambisonic sound, you can make it to where it guides people to, okay, I want somebody to turn to the right. Let's start making a sound that was over on that side, and then they can guide themselves towards going that direction. Because the last thing you want is something like jumping over your shoulder, and you've already lost, like we talked about, most of your field of view because of these headsets, and then you're quickly moving, and that makes people sick. So a lot of nothing really jolty movement, things like that.
One thing I find as these video games get better and better is when they have little bugs, it gets creepier and creepier. Like once upon a time, a bug would happen. You're like, oh, my sprite moved halfway across or whatever. But now it's like people half embedded in tables. And, it's like very creepy looking and pretty realistic on top of it. You're like, I mean, that's going to give me nightmares, and and they're trying to talk to me as they're embedded in the table. Whoa.
What's going on? Alex, you want to talk about the Slack channel we have?
The Slack channel?
The Slack channel of broken things.
Oh, yes. Yes. We have a Slack channel of broken things, of all the terrible, odd, horrific things that we've created in 3D that just did not work for one reason or another, or many reasons. The other thing I was going to say is you can also retrain your brain. So using VR specifically is what I'm talking about here. I actually have a lot of motion sickness. I have my entire life. And I was really very concerned about being the tester for our projects. But one of the early projects that we did in our VR days is actually a system specifically geared toward fears and phobias. And so it was a gradated, levelized exposure therapy style. So you're exposed directly to the thing you're afraid of, and you do it in steps to overcome this fear or phobia. So level 1 was very cartoony. Level 2 was a little bit more realistic, and then it went up all the way to level 5. So level 5 was photorealism. That's when we started really getting into photogrammetry, volumetric video, and started creating the foundations for what became ModTech Labs. But going through and actually repetitively, frequently repeating this training of being in this space, having this fear of heights, having that sickness in the VR simulation, I was actually able to overcome that.
So either I've seen this before myself using your exact tech, or someone built an exact version of this, because I was at a conference and they said, "Do you have any phobias?" They kind of, I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, let's play this game." So I gave them heights, and which I actually do have a bit of fear of heights. So I'm like, "Okay, let's try it." And they put the goggles on, and I was suddenly on the top of a building, but I was pretty far away from the edge. And so this is their lowest setting, right? And I'm like, well, that's actually pretty far down. I can actually get the sensation of it. Like, okay, we'll move you up to level 3 or whatever. And now I'm like pretty close to the edge. I'm like, whoa, that's actually pretty intense already. I can tell if you, and that, like, they'll put you like on the edge, where your feet can like kind of dangle off the edge or whatever. And then they kind of deliver you to a safe space afterwards, like this meadow or whatever. So you kind of feel like you're nice and relaxed, and it's wide open spaces kind of thing. No agoraphobia or any other phobias you might have.
Yeah.
So I think that actually has a lot of promise, like a lot of promise, but for all kinds of phobias, like
Agreed.
phobias of snakes or spiders or heights or claustrophobia or all kinds of things.
Well, almost 3/4 of phobias are actually self-treatable as well. So you could send somebody through an experience like this, fear of spiders, fear of heights, things like that, and you wouldn't need a doctor to go ahead and actually deal with that.
But what is the number one phobia?
Speaking in front of people, which actually falls exactly into your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So if you could create an audience of people I know, which would be even better, that I would expect to see in the audience, and a bunch of randoms that you can kind of throw in there, that makes it extremely hard for me to feel like that's not real.
Well, I mean, half of it, they always tell you, like, envision people naked. I'm like, if it's all the people you know, that just makes it worse.
That's a different setting.
That's a different. What are they doing?
So, but resolution is another big problem with these VR headsets. So I think we should probably talk about that first, because a lot of people say it's very immersive, and I agree, but I also am not lost in it. I don't feel like I'm there. I feel like I am watching a cartoon that's pretty real, but it's a cartoon still. Where is that going? How long is it going to take before that's like, I'm sitting in a cafe in France sipping a mochaccino or whatever?
So you see a lot of this in like virtual production. You see this technology, and basically what they do is they beam the experience to the headset, and it's actually being processed on big honking machine. And so typically you see stuff like that where it either goes from like these very small use cases, and then it'll start to trickle down. I see probably within the next 4 years, 5 years, that having an all-in-one headset, it'll have that quality. I really think most of it will actually come down to the actual quality of the lenses first off as well. They have, really piss poor lenses. You end up getting the halos around the side, and then as well you have like screen door effect because the pixel isn't high enough. As soon as they start bringing that's about half of it, tell you the truth.
I saw one project, I think it got killed, that Facebook was thinking about building, where they had basically a ball with a bunch of lenses around this ball, but the ball was approximately the width of human eyes, and it was just a bunch of lenses that stitched stuff together. So you could theoretically put this inside of a cafe somewhere in France, and suddenly I'm immediately transported there, because it's any direction I look. I mean, I'm not allowed to move up or down or right or left. I'm just stuck in this torso that's immovable. But I could theoretically write a paper or do something else, as long as you could add a little bit of augmented reality on top of it. I think there's something to that we just really haven't tapped into exactly. We're close, but we haven't quite done it.
There is, and some of the stuff we actually talked about is the successor of that. So what you're talking about is light field technology. So light field technology has that, and you can do a little bit of movement, like you said, not really a whole bunch. The succession
move
of
your
that,
head, but you can't jump it down.
You can't jump
you
up
can't
and
leave
down.
to go to the restroom.
You can't really do too much, things like that. Yeah. So the succession of that would be nerfs, and so those are neural radiance fields. And that allows you to be able to view any object or any world just like that, where it's fully three-dimensional. It looks like photos. What it does is it's a subset of what's called view synthesis. View synthesis, you take a photo in one area and then a photo in another area, and a machine learning algorithm goes, oh, well, that's what it would look like if you looked here. And it does that over the entire object. And then there are ones that are underneath that, things like nerfies. So nerfies are that same thing, but in motion. You can see an entire person talk and walk, and it is absolutely looks just like real. The drawback is that is 8 giant Tesla GPUs running for 2 weeks for about 5 seconds worth of video.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, another version of this that I find quite off-putting that Hollywood keeps doing is 3D video. And the problem is the producer has a great idea of what they want you to be looking at. They're like, oh, this guy's jumping off the cliff or whatever. But I'm kind of curious what's going on with the car in the background. But my eyes are not allowed to look at it because it's out of focus. Now, we normally have this problem with just traditional 2D video. There's no difference there, except for this is supposed to feel real. So suddenly I'm just thrust in this strange world where my brain can't process what's going on instead of what I guess I'm just used to, which is this 3D video where it's more like a piece of paper or something, where it might be out of focus, but only because what's written on it is out of focus. It's a strange effect. Have you seen this? You know what I'm talking about?
I've seen it, and I've seen a couple of white papers that are very specifically to set that. It's there's foveated rendering, which is a subsect in view synthesis as well, where it allows the end user, and you can do this basically with your mouse. And so you can move around and you can change what's happening and where the focus is. If you add on top of that eye gaze direction, cool. It's exactly what you want.
That's exactly what I want.
Yeah.
So it seems like there should be infinite focal length cameras set up side by side to get the 3D effect, or ideally that ball thing I was talking about. So you can look in every direction, and you can look at infinite depth as long as it's tracking your eye. It knows you're trying to look, and it knows what direction you're looking. So you would have that full experience, and you can have this Marvel movie with all this crazy stuff happening all around you without that weird sense of it being a video and not having not really being there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the moral of the story to all of this is that consumer tech sucks. It's like really, really far behind from the consumer experience that we want at home on our devices. But we are seeing it move up in the world, right? In production, in higher end, higher budget ways. We are seeing those iterations. So I do think eventually it will trickle down, but it is to some extent limiting because of the hardware, stops that we have. And that's everything from our phones to the chips that we have a shortage on to, actually allocating the minerals and the materials to make the hardware that we use to process and play back these things.
Like helium.
Shortage.
Like helium.
Oh, who needs that?
Not the Ukrainians.
Everybody.
So there's a bunch of different problems. We talked about motion sickness being one of them. Accidental collisions, and I think is another very big one that happens quite often. People run into the wall, they run into their computer, they run into their kids.
Make for great videos.
They do make for great videos, but I think it's one of those things where you could quite easily end up walking off a cliff or whatever without really realizing what's going on, because there is no real sense of the world when you're in these things, and these things aren't protecting you. You're just sort of on your own.
Yeah, you have things like Guardians that help out, and I can tell you some virtual productions have dropped using all enclosed headsets because of this. You get somebody who tripped over a cable or a cord. It's a huge liability. You're talking about a director breaks the nose. You're not using that gear again.
There are actually collision barriers that you can put into these experiences that should be used. But then there's,
which works great until your cat's there.
Yeah, also, 100%.
Tell us more. This sounds like a story you have. Please continue.
You didn't actually.
You know what I'm saying? Like this is the kind of problem. Like all these
true.
things sound great on paper. Your Roomba goes underneath you and then you just die. Like all of that stuff sounds really great, but it's not what I think it should be. Or even needs to be even vaguely what I'd consider to be safe.
Agreed.
I think we're getting a little bit closer to the opportunity to put in those safety measures, right? Headsets now have outward-facing cameras. That means that you can have a view to some extent of the real world, and you can actually do some tracking and some understanding of what's happening there. Whether or not that's being built into experiences, questionable.
Well, and what happens behind you?
Please don't kill that. You lose the game if you kick your cat.
I think they sell that in the Steam store.
Oh yeah,
It's
good.
like $100. Don't
Good.
kick the cat.
Another big problem is information overload. I think a lot of people are just not prepared for this. They live a pretty dull life sitting there at their desk all day, and all of a sudden they're thrust into this very robust experience with all this stuff going on, and it can be quite overwhelming. Point where people will actually have seizures in some cases, or all kinds of other things, just purely based on the information. The intensification of experience. So you could have a normal experience conversation like this, but it can be much more immersive and for a certain cohort of people, they're going to find that to be overwhelming and think of the truly mentally ill or the elderly or children or whatever who don't quite have the normal grasp on reality that we do and can't separate that this isn't really happening. They, or on drugs, like they might be fine 1 minute, but then, the whatever they took, kicks in, and all of a sudden this is a much different experience. There's really no safeguards around that sort of thing. We have like age verification on some apps, let's say, but not age verification for the equipment. You know what I mean? Like kids are still going to be able to throw that on and start playing games or whatever.
I think this is the same thing we've seen generation by generation by generation. There were people that were afraid of having, women go on trains or it would cause miscarriages. Let's be honest. Every single generation has looked at technology and gone, wow, this is something different than what I know. What is this going to do to people? And I think it's a fair question to ask. I think it's something fair for all of us to kind of sit down and go, wow, let's put some things like maybe we don't show naughty material on TV in the middle of the day. Well, duh, kids are home. That's stupid. Don't do that. Same concept.
So the one that I'm probably most concerned about, because I think it has the most effect globally. I think all of those are kind of interesting. This motion sickness is important, but not going to change the world.
Not going to hurt anybody.
Is the concept of super-realism. So when we get to the point where when your tech is good enough that you can make me believe that you're sitting across the room, but you're not really there, and I'm actually having a real, friendship or relationship with these people, or, I actually am a cyborg and I actually do have superpowers and this is my actual life. And I never really leave this place. I can go over to the fridge because it's built into this thing, and I can eat my power-ups or whatever, which is required to continue the game, and I can stay in game, and I can really believe that I am this superhero with all these superpowers or that whatever. And I think, there's been a bunch of Hollywood movies about this kind of concept where people just aren't sure what's real or not. And I think the exit's a little easier to build than most people realize, unless you're even vaguely mentally unstable. And then it gets a lot harder to know what's real and what's not real. And I don't know if you've ever met anyone with like severe bipolar disorder, but they're hanging on by a thread as it is. Even with medications, it's pretty on the edge. Like I think that this actually could be a real problem for a certain group of people who they don't even necessarily know they have the problem either. Just they really truly believe. This is a conversation I had with somebody, a real conversation. This woman believed that Amazon videos were speaking to her and they were aliens and they were coming to get her.
They're not?
And they were speaking specifically through Amazon Prime's website, through the Prime in particular. There's Prime movies.
It's only the Prime one, so it's not any of the other ones. Wow, that's a very specific. How do you treat that?
Drugs,
lots of medication.
But she wouldn't necessarily know that this was happening, and this is a real problem. You don't want this person driving a car, let alone really truly believing and getting into this thing and believing now that she has superpowers or whatever. And
true. I watch a whole TikTok on a guy who doesn't know that people are real or not real, and he uses his cell phone to see if someone's real. So he pulls up his camera and he's like, oh, if he's not in there, then his brain doesn't do that. But you're 100% right. Like when you have an entire environment and this could be used also for training. It can be used for.
We'll talk about the positive too. I just want to get this out of the way.
I'm thinking negative training. I'm talking about Manchurian candidate level stuff. You find somebody semi-unstable and you give them something to chew on. And you give them something that seems so real. It's difficult to understand the differences between them. That this is something.
Timothy McVeigh's story, I think. Am I getting it right?
Close. Yeah. Close. But Manchurian Candidate as well. I mean, that was, JFK and or RFK, sorry, and that whole kind of setup. So
Yeah, the ethical boundaries are not clear, to be honest. Obviously, like we all have different opinions about where those boundaries should be. There are none really in place that are being enforced at this point, right? Even
Are there any working groups working on this or trying to think
Yes,
through it and
absolutely.
put policy?
yeah,
Just like I mean, everyone opts into this policy, I would imagine, but it seems like a useful policy.
yeah,
So we both done work on this. Tim specifically with CTA, Consumer Technology Association, the folks that do CES. They're also a lobbying body on the other side. They create standards, education, and do regulatory specifically on behalf of technologists. And so, these are, we're in there with large corporations. We've been working with them for the last 4 years, really making sure that we are helping to facilitate opportunity for education and good use cases and ethical boundaries and appropriate levels of technology and interference by corporations, et cetera. And so, Tim specifically, led the charge on the rules around XR for limited mobility. That was published last year. So that's an open, free document through the CTA website. And it is from a developer's perspective. So, we're talking about all these pieces and parts, right? Half of it is, the experience is the hardware itself, and the other half is really the content. And so you have to be thinking about both sides of that. How realistic are we going with both pieces? How realistic can we get with, the visuals themselves based on, the actual hardware and then the content, right? So myself, I'm leading right now. We're actually close to wrapping diversity and inclusion for XR. And so again, creating standards, best practices, and we've talked about things that honestly hadn't really even occurred to me. So marital status, for instance, if you're thinking about someone who is married versus not married versus pregnant versus with children, there's like a whole, familial, like there's this whole other piece. People get, discriminated against for that piece of the world and their life.
I see.
Et cetera, right? And if you're portraying someone in a specific way, or they want to be portrayed in a different way, those things all have to be considered.
So, I mean, I think if anyone's listening and they don't see that this is coming, I think one example that we can all sort of look to and go, is Snapchat filters.
Yep.
Because that is creating a lot of body dysmorphia. Yes. People are saying, oh, my eyes are too this, or my forehead is too blah, or whatever. And it's leading people down a path of trying to figure out, well, my body really should look like this, doll or whatever, or it should be, I should be more muscular or whatever the thing is. And they're actually uploading it. So even if you don't use those Snapchat filters, you're starting to see, oh, that's what everyone looks like. And that's what beauty looks like. And that's what people should look like. And if that's already happening and these people are not wearing VR headsets, they have no, super realism issues going on. They just think that that's what real life looks like. Yeah. I think we're headed down a pretty dangerous path if we're not careful.
Yeah, I completely agree. So we just recently finished up the ethics in AI category, and we're going to start opening up standards around Metaverse, so to speak. And a major section in that is going to be both AI ethics and ethics around sales and especially targeting children and things like that. Was actually in the game industry when the rules and the laws changed around being able to sell towards children and market towards children.
COPPA laws in particular.
100%. Yeah. I was in Canada at the time, and I remember having to rebuild basically everything that we had because you had to make sure that the person was not under X age when you were trying to sell to them and you were marketing towards them.
Darn, it was the other way all up to that point.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean the ones before that were games for cars, like the actual Cars game, from Disney. Yeah. So you're selling to kids all the time.
Of course you were. Of course you were. And that makes plenty of sense because you want to turn them into consumers early.
Oh yeah.
So let's talk about the VR as a cure thing. I think this is actually really, really interesting. I want to spend a little more time here. So I hadn't really thought of it until very recently as a way that you could also cure things like sexism or racism or ageism or whatever, where you could actually transplant your body into the body of the person who's being mistreated, let's say, and you could leverage that as a sort of seeing it from their perspective, living a life, just like living a day in their shoes, exactly as they would experience the world. Have you seen anything like that? Or is there anything going on like that?
Absolutely. There are companies actually dedicated to this. I do not recall the name off the top of my head, but I think it might actually be Body Swap, which I was like, so on point. It's perfect. But ultimately, what we're seeing is the opportunity to learn empathy, right? We're learning to be empathetic, exactly walking in someone else's shoes and seeing the world from their perspective. There is literally no better way to do that than actually embodying them, seeing how they, see the world, how they're treated in the world, and really getting sort of a taste of that firsthand.
I think those apps are never ever going to work because the person who is one of those things is not going to sign up for it. But I think if you took that same principle and you put it inside of a video game or whatever, where you're suddenly this other thing and you have to experience life in their shoes, it's going to have the same effect. You're going to go, wait. Why are you treating me like this? Like, oh, I'm a nice person. Because you're only seeing yourself from yourself. And then you look in a mirror and then you look at your skin or whatever, or people are treating you in a certain way and saying certain things about you. You're like, oh, geez, that's what it's like. And you'll have a very unique experience. So the dedicated apps, I'm not so pro on just because I just don't think they're going to work. But I think that concept has a lot of merit.
There's a lot of merit. I think obviously you could let this swing even further the other direction. And what was it, Minority Report, where they locked them up and made them watch all the horrors and atrocities and in their shoes for like 10,000 year kind of situation. Yeah. Government control could really take its fun.
Yeah. We'll get more to that too in a bit, but then it also gets into more sort of creepy areas as well. So like child predation, for instance, you could put yourself in the body of a child who's being predated upon, and a murder victim, where you could actually experience what it's like to be murdered by this person who would normally be a murderer. You can actually like start trying to deprogram people by making them experience what it would be like to be their victim.
Yeah. Well, and that feeds directly into what happens in your brain when you start facing a fear or phobia. That same exact concept. Basically, as you're feeding in towards your vestibular feedback loop and your amygdala becomes more and more desensitized for everyone, that's your fight and flight response. Then at a certain point, you end up getting oxytocin. So if you think about, as a human, if you run away from a big predator and then you made it, you're like, yeah, you kind of get that feeling. You're like, that rush. It's first is that dump of adrenaline, and then it's the oxytocin. You survived. Guess what you can do? You can do bigger and better things. And so people will not even just be like, oh, that was scary. They're going to be like, I want to be murdered. I want to be murdered by this horrible person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Humans are fun, aren't we?
I mean, that went sideways.
Did it really though? Like, I felt led.
Well,
I did put that carrot out there.
I am familiar with some apps that actually are doing just that in the sex trafficking arena, where they're specifically doing it as a first person. You are the victim being trafficked, but it's also about recognizing the signs and the opportunities that these predators have. And so in part, it's training and education for sort of in general, like it would be targeted at, airline staff, travel station folks, people that would come across these people in transit, and hopefully
or hotel staff, maybe.
Be able to put a stop to it, ideally before they are off the grid. And so there's an element of training, there's an element of empathy, and then there's really, I think just general education, right? I don't know all the signs and symbols of what to look for in that kind of interaction, but there are ways to learn.
Sure.
And the learning from VR is actually a much deeper, more concentrated, longer lasting type of learning because it's interactive, because it's immersive, because it's first person, whether you're learning to crank a wrench on an engine or you're learning to recognize, human, movement symbols for, sex trafficking, right? There's a wide variety of things that you can learn that really imprint themselves more effectively on your psyche and your being.
Yeah, I tend to think that doesn't even need to be particularly graphic. You can do it with sort of cartoons and get away with it because you're really just, in that case, you're just trying to impart a little bit of knowledge. And now you do want it to be immersive enough so they pay attention, because the problem with a lot of training is it's just so boring. People just don't care. But if you actually feel like you're there even a little bit, even if it's just a cartoon, you can be inside of a cartoon. I mean, that's a thing, I guess. That's good enough. You'd be able to use that as training material. That's pretty interesting. So, all right, we talked a little bit about some of these different app uses, but I just want to name games, face swapping, interior design. You mentioned whether your couch is going to fit, which is actually a pretty interesting use case for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is now they know what your place looks like.
What are they doing with your data?
Exactly. Translation apps, which I think that's actually one of the more heartwarming things I think that we can do now is we can actually talk to one another. That's a really
boop, boop.
NVIDIA released and they did a whole bunch. So if anybody watched GTC, that's the reason why I'm bringing this up. It was like a couple of days ago, where it actually moves the mouth too. So it actually looks like they're saying it in the other language.
It's amazing.
And it's just like, it's all machine learning over top. Yeah. So it's super deep fake, super cool though.
Yeah. Very cool. Improving shopping metadata. So, you basically, take your camera, move it over a can of soup, and you can say, oh, you can get it cheaper at this other store, or there's what the ingredients are, or this is not going to kill you because it doesn't have peanuts in it, or whatever, right? So
here's a recipe.
Here's a recipe, right? Exactly. Or, apply these coupons, or if you buy this, you get one off, or whatever. All these different things you could do on top.
This has already been done, and it was abused by Target as a fun one. What they did was they actually raised the prices of online purchasing while you were in the store. So you could buy it maybe at Target online at like, $5. But if you were within a geofence of like a store, then it was like $10, which actually matched the in-store price.
That makes sense.
Yeah, go Target.
I mean, wouldn't you do the same? Well, let's be honest.
Yeah, probably.
So to me, AR is the killer of the two. If I'm going to pick one horse to ride on this race, AR seems to be the one that's it's so universally incredibly useful for almost innumerable reasons. But what are some of the AR apps that you guys are seeing that are interesting? Anything that stand out that? I mean, I'm seeing all kinds of interesting, but also stupid. A lot of video games, right? But I think to me, knowing not to dig the ground because there's something bad in the ground, it seems like such amazing utility. There's an app called Architecture of Radio, and props to whoever wrote this app because it's just so neat. I think it's kind of expensive, but very cool. You can rotate it around in a 3-dimensional space, and you can see where all of the radio towers are. You can see the satellites overhead, and you know where all the radio signals are and how strong they are based on where you are located in the world. So you can say, oh, I'm probably getting interference from these 3 satellites or from that over there or whatever. Like, these are incredibly potent apps that do just maybe 1 or 2 bespoke things, but what are you guys seeing out there?
I mean, I default to, plant identification. I'm like inevitably, my kids are like, what's that tree, Mom? And I'm like, I have no idea. That is
the dogwood. They're all dogwoods.
I don't know. An oak.
Is that a pine? No. Dog.
Right. An oak of some variety. We're in Texas. I don't know. And so that one's actually fun and educational.
The bug one is also very useful.
The bug one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just
excellent.
FYI.
Yes. And then, of course, I'm going to toot our own horn here and talk about our app. So the Mod 3D scanner, Android and iOS, we use augmented reality to help guide users to take images in the right places.
In the right locations.
To create 3D assets.
Because otherwise that'd be very tricky. You're like, kind of go in a big donut and then go a smaller donut and a smaller donut. And
correct.
It'd be hard to explain auditorially or even with video demos. It's just easier using AR to show them where to go.
Agreed.
Yes, absolutely. And there are some freeform apps out there that let you kind of do your own thing. Results are varied. And ultimately, if you're not a professional scanner, you're not going to really understand it. So we're geared really kind of in between professional and completely, new to scanning. And so that we can help educate the users and really get them done quicker, faster, easier, and more effectively, right? We know exactly what the pattern is. We know exactly what we're getting out of it. And so we can make that end quality significantly better, right? With the horsepower on our servers and on our systems.
So one of the things that I think could be a huge boon to a number of people who are, let's say, either handicapped or just semi-retired or maybe even like basically fully retired, but they have one skill that is just super, super valuable. it'd be great to have some AR overlay on top of whatever you're doing, where this expert's whispering in your ear, "Oh no, don't click that," or don't clip that wire or whatever. I mean, I can think of hundreds of different trade type jobs where, or maybe even just the DIY version of it. Like I'm doing something, I don't want to call some repair guy all the way over to my house to tell me which of X to do. Just tell me in my ear while you're watching what I'm doing, or have him draw little lines. This one right here, no, this one has to go here, so I can see it. And now it's sort of floating there in space, so it's not going anywhere. So I can hang up, and it's all sort of done. Like it seems like that kind of thing is just wildly underutilized, and it could be monumentally useful.
It actually has been done. It's failed. Yeah, it was when the HoloLens first came out. So you're talking about now. It's about 6 years ago,
so
and that's probably the big reason why it failed. But there was a shared experience in a way that somebody who was remote could get onto Skype because it's Microsoft, and they could see in
part 2 of why it failed.
Then you could see people like in 3D, and you could do like you were saying. You could point at stuff, and then because they had the headset and they had the depth, they could see where you were pointing at and doing. But that a couple of people made a project which was for home repair. It was the same exact thing, like plumbing and
but even something
electrical.
Much more complicated. Like I'm
Server
working
repair.
on or I'm working on an oil rig, and flying somebody all the way out to this remote location might be a little cost prohibitive, but I do need this problem fixed right now because people will die.
This is definitely happening. This is happening at scale in companies for high level professional use cases like that. But at home use, it's definitely not really being done effectively at this point.
Especially because AR is terrible right now.
It is.
Just no one's. Other than on your phone, right? I guess that's the closest thing we've got is everyone's got a phone in their pocket so they can hold up their camera and say, okay, here's what's happening. And then they could just draw on it or whatever.
Yeah, we actually, we've seen a couple of use cases that have come through for geological study where they would end up using our app to go ahead and do the initial scan. And then with augmented reality, the individual could actually look at what the object was. So if you have a geologist isn't going to go out in the field. But, you could send out, some young buck with a camera and takes all the photos and then uploads to servers, and then that end user can end up seeing that object. So it's there, and there's lots of parts and pieces that are there. I think the bigger thing is the mindset. The people in the verticals that have the money are completely diverted from solutions that are like that. So the two bigs, of course, are going to be, as always, oil and gas and entertainment. And those are the two ones that you want to see adoption. Oil and gas runs into a obvious major issue is that a lot of their people are aging out. And that's on the geology side, that's on the capture side, that's everything all the way up and down. And so, like how do we make sure that when people are drilling and doing things that they're doing in an ecological way and going out there with scanning tech and making sure that it's cheap enough and easy enough that they can't just say, no, that was too difficult, and then it goes out to, some geologists and then as well some ecologists to make sure that they're not like, killing sea turtles. That sounds like a great thing to do.
Unless you like killing sea turtles, but yes.
I kick them at least once a week.
So a friend of mine, Dan Kaminsky, RIP, he just recently passed, invented a technology where you can actually change the visual spectrum so you can actually see in color or see some version of color for colorblind people, which is just a phenomenal app. It's called DanCam, K-A-M, for Kaminsky. I think that type of app has a lot of promise as well for an innumerable amount of people. And once it was Google Glass. Google Glass was just not the right tech for all kinds of reasons. It was very bright. It was ugly. It was Google. It was very invasive because it was always taking video. It was, I actually told multiple people who had them, like, you are not invited over to my house if you're wearing those things. Sorry. I don't know what you're going to be taking photos of. It's one thing if someone has a camera in their pocket. It's a whole other thing if they're, waving it around at all times where it's recording. That's a very different experience. Being on camera right now, does that feel different? I bet it does feel a little different than your average everyday, which is sort of walking around town.
I don't know. We know you pretty well, so this is a pretty typical sit down and talk, and usually have some maybe some gin or something like that with you, right?
But it is quite off-putting, I think, to have something like that happening. But yet, I think that's where everything's going. I don't think it'll look like that. I don't think it'll look like that at all for a number of reasons. It's just very, very ugly. But I think Dan was onto something. That tech, I think, is very, very useful for a wide variety of people. And because it can be overlaid in contact lenses, let's say, or just traditional glasses that just look better on people. I think that that's something we could see definitely in the next handful of years. And I'm surprised Apple hasn't already come up with something to compete with, various different platforms.
They're waiting for a mature market.
Apple usually is.
I think they will make the mature market, is my bet.
They do tend to mature technology. You're correct. They they did very well with the LiDAR technology, and now they've patents that they have. Actually, I was privy to a headset that looked very realistic. It was something that's not quite out there yet, but it looked like a regular pair of glasses. And then you would have a processing device in your pocket, and so it's not like a HoloLens or anything like that. But like, I was very blown away that I was like, oh, this is something I wouldn't mind wearing out.
Sure. So one thing, the marriage of VR and AR, I think was kind of interesting, is the Avatar set, Avatar 2, when they're doing filming, they've already decided that some characters are going to be running through a forest or whatever, and they have this sort of like iPad looking thing in this big room with all these sort of sensors all over the room, so they know exactly where this iPad is at all times, and various different sort of camera aperture and lenses or whatever, joysticks sitting on either side, where they can sort of say, I want it to look like this, and kind of pan and zoom or whatever, and they walk around this 3D world that's it is VR in the sense that they are looking at the virtual world as they're walking around it, but it is AR in the sense where they get to decide where they're going to be in this three-dimensional world in the real world, in actual real 3D space, which I thought was very interesting that is such a thing, that exists, first of all, but also I think that is kind of where everything's going, that it's sort of like almost the opposite of motion capture, right? The motion has already been decided. It's more where the camera is going to be, and you want to have the exact right angle on it. And have you heard of anything like that before?
I mean, I can go. It's called virtual production, and I was used heavily on a number of different movies. So when I was working at Sony Picture Imageworks, we ended up doing cleanup as part of my training on Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs #2. And part of the initial training was actually for the first Cloudy. And we're using a big old JVC camera where they push through video into the headset, and you could actually do that as like a over-the-shoulder camera into, as everybody knows or may not know, Cloudy was an entirely cartooned event. And so, somebody was running physically through a fully digital scene, and they looked in through the eyepiece, and it was, the digital world that they were able to see. But this combination technology was also heavily used on Lion King, and then if anybody's seen any BTS or behind the scenes for Mandalorian, that's when it became like really blossom, and really kind of come out.
And that was interesting because the stage itself it was almost like a projection mapping on the stage as they were acting. It was pretty interesting.
That's a big thing. Yeah, you can do combination between LED walls. You can do full projection mapping. You can do everything in between. But that's some of the heavy stuff that we're doing with movie studios is virtual production, being able to, because you can't do it in post. That was always the joke. Oh, we'll fix it in post. There is no post anymore. It's all happening. You have to do it in pre. You have to have things scanned. You have to have the world scanned. You have to have 3D assets, and our technology is being heavily used in a number of different groups and studios. So
Virtual production is really dynamic, right? So not only do you get to choose where you are in space, where the camera angle is, you can also, with these digital sets, actually influence the scene, right? So you say, oh, I've decided it should be dusk, not dawn. You can literally change the lighting. You can change the entire scene behind you. Oh, I want this side of the canyon, not that side of the canyon, right? And as long as you have a high quality scan of an on location shoot that you've done, number one, you don't have to port your entire camera crew and actors there, right? You can actually bring the set to the stage and do the production there. And so it really is this culmination of the physical and the digital coming together in a way that is not only going to make it more cost effective to actually create these productions, but also it helps the actors and the folks that are on set be more in the moment and actually really engage with the scene even further, right? There's green screen is going to be a thing of the past. The amount of cleanup, post-production, and things that have to happen to make green screen like effective really it's going the way of the dodo,
Yeah.
and getting replaced by these digital screens.
Yeah, for all kinds of reasons. I've tried to work on green screens a couple times, and it's funny. One thing I posted on Facebook one time was a photo of me in front of a green screen, and I'm like, "Oh, nothing bad could happen to this photo, so I'm just going to place it right here." And kind of getting everyone to play along, and so a lot of people did jump in, and they were trying to do stuff with it. And in every single one of them, there was a bit of like tinge, a little, it was very difficult for them, and I didn't do any work to soup it up to make it better. But at the same time, that is just an enormous amount of cleanup, as you said. So I think you're right. I think this is all kind of going to this virtual world sort of design or these walls that are 3D printed walls / projection mapping / LEDs or whatever, because I think that is just way cheaper, way better.
Well, it's just a new age set design.
And as soon as we have LED screens that are nice and flexible, then it gets just that much better.
Oh yeah.
All right. So another thing I think that is kind of interesting about this is I think there's a way, if we can get AR working right, we might actually be able to stop a lot more crime. So it's sort of like sort of the promise of a Google Glass, because I have a lot of problems with Google Glass, but the promise of always when I'm outside my house, let's say, like don't record while I'm inside my house, or only record when this jerk is over because he's very likely to cause fights or something.
Every day.
Or only start recording, or always record, but only record the 30 seconds or so unless I yell something, and then all of a sudden start buffering, moving from buffer to actually writing to disk or something. I think there's a way using a little bit of AI and augmented reality where it can actually say, well, this person's starting to wind up for a punch, or this person appears to be walking in a way that means they might be carrying a weapon or something, or you might be able to overlay, or this person's a known felon. You might want to be wary about this, because this person's just kind of walking up to you out of the blue. You don't know if they're a normal person just kind of walking up, they have a problem with their tire or something, or that there might be something more nefarious going on there. I realize that there's a lot of potential for bad things to happen with that sort of profiling as well. But I do think that there could be some good stuff in there, buried in there. Have you heard any apps along those lines or thought about that at all?
So I have a lot of problems more than I have agreement with it. And I think more of that comes from the technological capabilities that we currently sit in. And, people of color just in general are massively misidentified. I don't know how many different facial recognition systems. I walk behind somebody who has a darker skin tone, it goes to me instead of to them. As well, people who have Native American roots are seen as children. Like these things are absolutely, most face rec technology is so bad. If we started fixing that, sure, there'll be a certain amount of biases, and I've
but it has gotten
with standards. Better is a very relative term.
I concur. I mean, oftentimes it won't record any human at all in the scene. It's like, what is going on?
There's lots of people.
There's lots of people here. What's going on? So I realize I agree, but also I think that even if you got it right less than 50% of the time, there would still be significant value to this thing. Like I think that. So I was playing around with the idea of an app that would allow you to route through cities, but based on any parameters you want instead of the typical ones. Sure. Like, I don't really care that much about traffic today because I'm not in a hurry. So show me all the beautiful places, or show me put me on a route where I'm going to see the most amount of water, or so, whatever. All these overlays.
Avoid the high crime areas.
Yes.
You nailed it. You nailed it. And so what happens if that app becomes extremely popular and certain areas are just fully avoided by all traffic? Not because you selected it, but that's by default, because that will get you where you want to go, at least chance of something bad happening. It's pretty interesting where things can go. I don't know what the ethics on that exactly are, but it seems like there's probably some ethical challenges.
It creates a further divide of the have and have not.
I agree.
Yeah.
So if you got a smartphone and this app, and the education necessary to download and use said app, and a car, you can avoid the situation where you're ever going to be in altercations.
Yeah, the data's there. Actually, that's how we found out the apartment that we were living in, we split condo in New Orleans. So I was working at Game Loft in New Orleans, video game studio, and we were looking for a safe place, and they have a crime map. Austin has a crime map. It doesn't matter where you live. And I found there's this one little half block area that nothing had happened in 10 years. So we drive over there. We originally were going to a house. That one wasn't taken, but the one right down the way was. And we get it, and it was great. And then we end up like, why is this place still so safe? And I look right across the street, and there's a little old lady in a canary yellow house with a Winchester at her feet. She ended up having a heart attack, went to the hospital for 2 weeks, and there was a fight, the only fight in the last however many years, because the little old lady was in the hospital and her Winchester wasn't watching.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is something to that. It's just, I don't know if I feel comfortable pushing it. It's interesting to think about. I like the idea. I like the thought exercise. I'm not sure that the ramifications are altogether the best, because that would just depress areas that are already depressed even further. It would have a sort of accelerating effect.
I was going to say, I think about Waze.
Yeah.
So the Waze app, actually they coined a term, a Waze left. So it was a wayfinding app that was like a crowdsourced data, right? And so, everyone would kind of, they would read all the metrics from everyone's phone about how fast they were going or where they were traveling, all that stuff, and then pipe it in, right? And so you would get, the fastest route, right, would take you across 72 lanes of traffic. You needed to take an unprotected left. And you're like, why, Waze? Why?
And it was uphill. You're talking about the one in LA, right? That thing was horrible.
Horrifying. LA was actually a great city for Waze, except for when it did a Waze left on us. And we're like, this is so bad. But I mean, this is an aggregate of a lot of data. This is an aggregate of, of wayfinding. And that's where my mind went. And I was like, for all the preparation and all the data and all the things that they were trying to do on the good side, they also had this very negative piece that actually was a huge deterrent from using it, because it was very dicey.
Well, they're already talking about how, routing apps are messing up street flow and things like that, because they send them on regular streets. But to your exact question, I wonder if it would speed up gentrification.
Oh, it certainly would. Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're depressing an area,
Yep.
and then suddenly, people are buying it up, and then they're bringing in their own security, and then the police are starting to watch that area. And then now it's bringing more traffic through that area again. But, then it displaces the people that were already there, because, nobody was going through that area. So all the businesses that were there, I mean, it's like the Walmart effect, right?
They all leave. Yep. So another thing I think would be the killer app for me in particular for AR is everyone's name. I am terrible remembering people's name, but it'd be awfully nice if this thing could do a little bit of, okay, you've seen this person. When is the last time I saw this person? You saw him at a conference 3 years ago. Well, I'm not going to remember that. Like, okay, thank you. That would be tremendously useful. And even just like a small writer of, what their name is in context of who I met them with would be quite useful to spark that. Oh, that's what we talked about. That's, that was the context of this conversation. If someone can build that I think that would, and actually make it work. I'm not saying, some BS version of it. I think that would be extraordinarily useful. People's birthday, throw it on there. Why not? Basically all the information you get in like an Outlook contact. That would be extremely.
I know
where
somebody
do they live?
Who did something like this with Google Glass, and they set up a LinkedIn hit, and they were trying to figure out all the investors that were in the room. And so as they turned, then they would get photos on one side, and they would go, okay, these are the people they actually need to talk to. It didn't really help them much, but it was a really interesting story. They're like, oh, I got to talk to them. Yeah, but it was interesting.
It is interesting. So I saw another thing that I thought was really cool about AR and VR in particular. It allows people to explore trolley problems that normally you wouldn't get to. So we always talk about trolley problems. Would you throw this this person on the train track to save these 4 other kids or whatever? And usually it's some fat man that you're going to be throwing on the in this trolley problem.
Of course.
So one version of it is you just have the switch. You switch and it kills the fat guy. And then another version, you actually have to push him off a bridge, and then he'll land on the train tracks, and it'll crush him, but stop the train, and the kids will be saved. And despite the fact that they have the exact same effect, one person dies, 4 people live, people have a lot of problems with the second one. They just don't want to do it. Like, that's a little bit too intimate, I guess. Pushing a button's way, way, way easier. But I think AR and VR allows you to actually start exploring these things a little bit more carefully. Like, what is it about that? And you can really tune it to the exact thing that people are allergic to or do or don't want to do about these different versions of these trolley problems.
Yeah.
I think that's really an area that no one has truly explored and could be.
There's an interesting one I've seen before. I don't know if you know about this one. It was, I think, a Stanford study where they were trying to figure out if somebody would hurt another person. And they were told if they pressed the button over and over and over again, it would end up hurting them more and more and more. And there was no reason why they were told. It just can tell them that it was getting progressively worse. And many people, by being very pressured by the other, the people who are running the study, they would continue to turn up the power, even to lethal doses, just because they were pushed. And, once again, we've talked about, governmental hands and fingers into things and nefariousness and nefarious actions. I think you're 100% right. Nobody's really touched it on that side. And then, of course, my fear is misuse and abuse.
Of course, but also it's very useful for things like, are you going to press the button in the nuclear bunker? Yeah. Are you actually going to go through with your job? It's a lot easier to actually experience all the sights and the sounds and the touches and whatever, which I realize they try to do with, actual live simulations, but you could do it 20 times a day when they're off duty, or just hanging out, or in weird scenarios that are actually very difficult. Like all of a sudden there's a gas leak, or what do you do? Like these weird scenarios where they're having to take corrective action that might be, or you might actually have to kill the guy next to you for reals, well, you're probably not practicing that every day. Well, you could in this VR sense.
True.
Humans are pack animals, right? And so I do think that it has that influence of like who's around you, what is the scene being set, right? Are you saving 20 people and killing 1 person? But I do think there's a lot of value in that continued practice of in an immersive way, right? Even going back to literally just like retraining your brain for stressful things that are coming. So for me particularly, I would go back to like having kids. Giving birth is like a very daunting thing, and you don't know what it's going to be like until you're doing it, right? And so you can practice, you can visualize, you can do everything. I mean, I did all the things to sort of prepare myself for it, right? It still didn't happen the way that I expected it to, but it was still an inevitable like happening, right? And so I think the more you can kind of, prepare yourself in different manners, the better off you're going to be. So I think there's a lot of value there.
Reduction of PTSD and things like that. So if you pre-train appropriately enough when you're talking about police, military, or EMS, they've seen that it reduces the chances of those individuals having PTSD. So once again, another good useful piece.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So one of the projects that we sort of toyed with at one point a long time ago was the idea of using the 3D volumetric capturing, ideally in slow motion, which is actually an area that it's like this little sub niche of this whole thing, to watch somebody, let's say, taking a gun out of a holster and pointing it and pulling the trigger. And the idea would be, are they pulling it too quick? Are they putting their finger on the trigger ahead of time? Are they actually looking at the sights? Are they dropping the muzzle right before they shoot? And all these sort of shooter problems that you could extrapolate and turn into military applications. And the utility for something like that on the battlefield, when you start extrapolating to all of these little sort of micro movements, you're like, where did this person go wrong? Why do they keep missing? What's happening there? It's actually really difficult to diagnose. All you can see is that they missed. But why did they miss? It's sort of like that golf swing where it's the perfect golf swing, but for some reason it always just keeps going left. What's going on? Well, it turns out that right at the last second, this thing is happening. And you can slow the video down if they're in a stable enough location, but it would be even better if you could spin the camera around. It's like, oh, look, it's their ankle that's twisting here, or whatever is causing this minor issue to occur. Where do you see that sort of going especially in the military space. Where do you see that going?
I mean, I look at that all as kind of athletic performance, right? Whether it's a gun or a golf club, your body movements and your mental state, of course, all play into your in performance, right? We have very early on, we identified that there were immediate use cases for VR training, specifically, in this realm. And again, it's that training piece is really important, but that feedback and that analytics part is also really important. Understanding not only, how to mentally prepare yourself for these different scenes and scenarios, but also how to physically prep and overcome, some of those shortcomings that you might have with your ankle twisting or your finger being on the trigger too early or whatever the case is. We have looked at that more in depth on the sports training side, softball and a few other golf as well, and how we can help sort of create solutions in that realm. What it often boils down to is that you need cameras that have a high frame rate because the movement is quick, right? You need to be able to capture all of those minute movements and be able to play them back and analyze them effectively. And then, of course, depending on how you're actually analyzing, whether it's a human or whether it's a machine, well, how are you training it? What does your data sets look like? What are you really trying to get out of this?
Yeah, one of the things I think is wrong with a lot of training is that there's a human doing the training.
Yeah.
Humans are terrible. We're really, really, really bad at training. And what other humans are bad about is receiving bad human training. If someone's yelling at you over your shoulder, telling, you're doing this all wrong, and I've done it 100 times, let me just show you how it's done.
Hold that flashlight higher, son.
Or whatever. It's just,
Thanks, Dad.
We've all had very bad people we just can't learn from. We just can't do it. But computers, on the other hand, I mean, they're totally emotionless. They're just saying, hey, this is what the problem is. If you want to correct it, here's how to correct it. And so I can do it 1,000 times wrong. I'm like, oh, I really want to do it right. And the computer's not getting frustrated. The computer's just like, okay, you're doing the thing wrong again. It's like, oh, and I just keep doing it and do it. And then finally I do it right. And it's like, yep, you did it right. It's like, wow, that was the time I did it right. That's amazing. No one's time is being abused. It's just me and a computer just hanging out doing the thing we need to do. And I think for military applications in particular, that kind of thing, allowing a soldier to fail 1,000 times until they just get it right, I think that could take a lot of soldiers who would normally just not be suitable for whatever job and make them suitable. It can make their brain work. It can make their body work in whatever way it would. It could be, a sports team. It could be, diving. Who knows, right? It could be anything. I think that there's a lot of promise in that sort of paying very, very close attention to every micro movement. I actually saw something recently in basketball where they were trying to do photogrammetry in, I wouldn't call it real time because I'm sure it was delayed, but they were moving the camera around and sort of going through their players, and so you could see the shot from different angles or whatever. And that's fine for post-game analysis, but I think it's even better for training where, I'm trying to hit this shot. I'm just trying to do this weird thing. And it's always weird because it's an off angle. I'm trying to shoot in a weird way or whatever. It's not something that's going to happen very often in a game. Certainly not often enough for that to make sense, for that photogrammetry thing to actually be useful, because it's never going to happen, or very rarely going to happen. But in training, I've got hours and hours and hours just to practice this one shot. Well, show me how to do it right. And no, coach, I know you've got 50 other people to go pay attention to and, media stuff to go handle and whatever, but I just need to get this one shot right. So you practice it over and over. The computer just gently tells you, nope, you're off by this. You moved your ankle again, or whatever. I think there's a lot of value to that.
It's a ton. Actually, we had looked at police training. I don't know if anyone's seen actual police training. It's walls on screen. Everybody remember going to Chuck E. Cheese's and, you shoot. It's that. That's exactly what they have. And being able to take that to another level where you're talking about scanning people, putting people in, and you can replay that scenario, not necessarily the same way over and over and over again, but things can change. So we end up putting a white paper together with Intel that was about being able to go ahead and set up very easy police and military training where you could move around things like foam blocks. You could move around the room. You could, drop, these, QR code like objects into the room, and then the machine would go ahead and set that up. So, say you're practicing something like, say a school shooting, trying to protect kids from from that, well, you need the layout. And so you could put up these foam blocks and it looks like this. Here's the stairs, everything like that. You put on the headset, boom, you're immersed entirely in that environment. And then you could run these simulations over and over again. It comes out this side, he comes out that side. They come from that. There's 5 people here. There's 12, and you can run these completely contrived situations that you never could even possibly see in the real world, but it prepares for so much more. And I see these as the
even
next evolution.
what even better is then the computer says, here's what you just did wrong.
Exactly.
And you might have an instructor who can go and coach you or whatever, but they have gone home and now you're just working through the night, just doing your exercises until you got good at it. I think there's a lot of value to that part in particular, where there's just, it reminds me of, I was talking to a friend of mine. I was like, well, we built this app, and he was talking about, it's like, oh, well, how do I get this thing set up? I'm like, oh, just give us a call. He's like, I have to call you to do this? Can I just go to a website or something? I'm like, well, it's new. It's beta software, blah, blah. He's like, I'm sorry. I don't want to deal with salespeople, blah, blah, blah. It's sort of that sort of, I think people really, there was another example of this where, I'm not sure, I think this actually predates COVID, but they were trying to do like teledoc stuff. And they're like, well, it turns out if the teledoc asks you questions, people are way more likely to answer correctly. They're not going to lie to that computer. But if they think a human's on the other line, even if the human's the one writing the questions, they're much less likely to want to answer honestly about it.
Well, the other thing, right, exactly what you're speaking to is it's a lesser drain on resources, right? You don't need to have other people. You don't need to have, someone watching you. You don't need to have all of these pieces and parts in place to do the training, to really dig into it, do it 1,000 times. We actually saw this exact thing. We applied this similar principle. So Quantum Rehabilitation is the second largest motorized wheelchair manufacturer in the world. When we were under Minor Studios, we actually created iDrive VR with them, which is a virtual reality driving simulation for power chairs, for motorized wheelchairs. And so it used the tenets of that virtual reality therapy that we created earlier on, levelized, sort of gamified play. What it did is it actually hijacked the physical drive control from the wheelchair. So whether that was a joystick, a sip and puff, which is like a straw.
That's even better. So it's like it's actually the soldier's gun or the actual human being's wheelchair.
Yes, 100%. Exactly.
Interesting.
So they did not have to be seated in a proper wheelchair. They needed to have the access to the drive control that they were using, the computer and the headset essentially. So they could do it from a bed. They could do it from a chair.
It would be even better though if it actually feels like the wheelchair. Everything's ideal.
Well, they did do ones where the chair actually moved and things got weird. But just kidding. No, we didn't let that happen. That's the problem.
One of the tough parts with that entire sort of ecosystem is that clinicians are the ones that are typically expected to train people on using their wheelchairs, to be the oversight. And so there's limited bandwidth. So you're talking, 20-ish hours of training that you get in a power chair. And if you've had like a severe accident and you are now, quadriplegic, this might include time learning to sit up again, not even, learning to actually operate something that accelerates and directionally changes based on a single movement of your head or your chin or your hand, depending on your, your body function. And so this is an exact direct sort of, symbol in a different arena, right? It's about maximizing resources and allowing people to access this training and do it to the best of their ability as much as they possibly can.
That thing that you said was actually, some patience well beyond human capability was the reason why iDrive was actually created. I had done a ride along with a family friend of ours. His name's Kevin. And he actually worked for a competitor of Quantum, so the ride along that I did was for a seating. And this gentleman had been in a massive car wreck and his entire spine was fused. I saw a man attempt to sit in a chair. And after his hour period that he was allowed to be in it, was incapable of doing nothing. They're like, oh, that was your hour. And I said something needed to happen.
Yeah, of course.
Human dignity is what mobility is about.
Yeah. It's taking away someone's legs.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's change the topic a little bit and talk about deepfakes.
Cool.
Just change it up. So what I think deepfakes really comes down to is no longer being able to trust our senses.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that might actually be a great thing, because now we might be in a situation where like starting to question everything. A lot of people are like, well, I don't want to be in a world where I have to question everything. I just want to be able to believe my pundit or whatever. It's like, well, now you can't even believe that, because that can easily be hijacked. What we're really talking about is identity theft, a different sort of identity theft where, they don't have to have your driver's license anymore. They can just look like you. They can be on Zoom theoretically if the models worked well enough and were dynamic enough, or they could just pre-record it and just send them a video or whatever. And here's your favorite pundit saying this terrible thing. There was a guy, I'm sure you saw, Chris Metaphysic AI, did the Tom Cruise deepfakes. So I personally, I was talking with Charlie Burgoyne about this. I personally did not think that was passing the uncanny valley, personally. Maybe I've just got a very specific eye for this kind of thing or something, but it was very close. I could see where it was going for sure. Where do you think that's going to be in another 5 years? Do you think it's just going to be something everyone has on their Snapchat filter and they can just play anything they want? Is it how far away are we, do you think?
I think with the "it looks like them" situation, yes. I think the thing that you detected, and this is how the uncanny valley works, it has to do with motion. That's the biggest part of the uncanny valley. It can look just like a person. And if you froze and you saw a single frame, you might have a difficulty understanding that was or wasn't him. But those minor tweaks and those minor mannerisms, and the reason why we do holographic video and volumetric video the way that we do, is that little things and those little ways that people's faces and things work. And that's the hard part.
Fortunately, they actually had both videos before and after. So, it's an actor who sounds kind of like Tom Cruise, or even pretty much like him. But the before and after, the light was quite different on the forehead and the cheeks and the nose or whatever. Just the angle that the light was coming in was different enough. And maybe that's what my eye was keying off of, or could have been what you're talking about. Slight different movements of the face, slight different movement of the head in general, that just was not quite accurate. But I totally think that's going to be overcome in a handful of years at max, kind of thing. I'm just not sure how accessible that's going to be. Is it going to still require massive gaming rigs with tons of GPUs, or is it something we're going to be able to miniaturize and put on smartphones? Or you think it's that close? You think we're all going to have it in our pockets? Well, then what can we trust?
I was like, do you want me to go to the tech side, Alex? You want to talk about the business side? You go ahead.
What I hope is that we start actually being able to own our own identities.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Which
through NFTs.
Through NFTs.
Wait, does that mean you can sell your identity forever?
Yeah, why not?
Why not? I mean, digital me is worth a lot more than physical me.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity for iteration in this space, and I do think that we are starting to see a lot more movement in protection of consumer rights. Particularly, if you're looking at the DMA, the things that are happening, the Digital Media Act in the EU, we're starting to see movement toward consumer friendly, not tech friendly, right? And so big tech, this is actually geared particularly at big tech in the US. They are looking at specific, revenue rates. That's when it's really going to hit. So we're talking your gatekeepers. So Google, Facebook, et cetera, right? They're going to be the ones that are subject to this. They have to have open-ended ecosystems. The EU says that everyone who buys something on Google Play should be able to play it on your Apple device, right? And vice versa. So open ecosystems, right? This is already a much more friendly opportunity for us as consumers. And then we're seeing, that they can't just scoop up every tiny company and then take over the entire space and do a lot of antitrust stuff. I think this is directly in line with the movement that should be happening in order to stop some of the movement around deepfakes, around, media spoofing and all the things that are happening that are kind of duping people. And I personally want to own my digital, the rights to my digital self and the rights to my data. And I believe that we're going to see a lot more movement in that direction.
This and the ethics around XR and technology around that was the reason why we actually went into CTA, because the last thing you want is an uninformed lawmaker. You end up making
literally
things,
just had this conversation with the Salient guys last week, so I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think one very interesting thing that is in this space is just there's a lot of photos of people online now. So building up, even if there's no video at all, unlike a situation like this where there's a lot of video of us, where there's no video, I do believe it's going to be possible to create this sort of retroactive, volumetric profiles of people.
It's been done.
Yeah.
Someone actually made a photogrammetric of blonde
someone.
JFK relationship, possibly.
Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe. Redid it. Thank you. They did a photogrammetric redo of Marilyn Monroe based off of movie angles and things like that. They were able to actually build one. So yeah.
So, but that had the advantage of having video. I would wonder how
Even
easy.
if you had enough photos.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with this. I think if you just have enough photos on your profile or whatever,
Yes.
you're going to be able to.
The
build
photos
up
are easier.
I think they would be easier actually,
Easier
and
to
so
work with.
they're easier and more abundant, which I think makes that pretty terrifying, as a matter of fact. So back to your point, your digital identity could just be lifted from you just by virtue of you posting, your holiday photos or whatever.
One of the reasons I don't post pictures of my kids online.
Yeah.
You want to be able to recognize them?
I feel like they should have the right to choose, and I don't think they're old enough to choose.
So where does this all, like, not being able to trust our senses thing go in terms of we have this sort of like pearl clutching around violence in video games, for instance. Don't roll your eyes. I said pearl clutching, but I think that there's a sort of a similar sort of sense of deepfakes from my perspective. I think both people are pretty good at detecting them just because they're like, where did this come from? Where's the source? And people just ask questions, especially about anyone who's of note, right? Some politician or something. But secondly, if it gets really bad, people will just go, oh, it's probably deepfake, and just move on. Or at least that's my sense of where things are going. Like, a lot of my more sort of in the weeds technical friends thinks that we should all be putting as much BS on the internet as we possibly can, just to make it so impossible for you to ever think that anything online is real, that you have to question everything and you just get senses about yourself, or just leave and go actually have a life in the real world. Don't use social media at all. Where do you feel? Where's your head at?
I personally fall on the side of I would rather just go have a real life.
There you go.
That being said, we work in digital, right? Literally everything we do and the way that we frame our work is around enabling others to do content creation, right? And this includes people, right? At some point. That's not really our focus at this juncture, but we see opportunities and we will put in the ethical boundaries as makers. I do think that part of the responsibility falls to the people that are making these enabling tools, the people that are making this content. If you're crossing an ethical boundary and you're taking someone's, digital presence, digital identity, and using it for inappropriate purposes without their consent, you should be held liable for that. But again, we come back to where does that fall on the regulatory scale, the legal scale? What can you actually do about it? That has yet to be determined, as far as I can tell.
I'm on the flip side. Put out as much crap as you can. 'Cause I totally agree with you. We were actually invited by Tim Draper on his 5-week hero camp thing, and one of the things that he does is tell 3 things about yourself, and one of them needs to be a lie. And it made it very clear very early, that a lot of people are extremely good at lying, and that's something I think everybody kind of inherently knows and inherently gets. But at the same time, trusting where things come from and trusting sources and stuff like that. Once it's on the internet, people just seem to go, oh, well, this seems good. And I think, there should be entire classes surrounding that for all children, going, hey, this is what you need to look for.
In terms of not being able to trust what even happened in history, just putting out enough BS. Oh, did you know that some French king he's the one who invented whatever, and everyone's like, oh wow, that's amazing, and share.
I heard Abraham Lincoln said that.
I mean, if you put enough of that stuff out, it's very difficult to know what's real and what's not real if your friends are sharing it. Like, oh, is this real? I better double check.
Yeah.
But then you check Wikipedia and it's also full of messes and, misquotations and whatever, because that's the idea, right? Just keep putting as much BS out there as you possibly can.
I know a guy who actually used to get backstage by putting his name on the band. And so you'd be like, oh, yes, I'm part of the band. And it's like a Wikipedia because anybody can change it.
Yeah, of course. Other ways to change websites too as well. Yeah. I think there is something to that concept. Back probably 20 year ago now, this is the first example of this this sort of super-realism thing. But this sort of predates what we modern think of as AR, VR, or whatever, anything like that. This is a torture technique that the Russians came up with, and I wanted to run this by you.
All right.
And I don't know if this is real or not, or this just came from one of my demented friends. I don't know, but I'm just going to say it anyway.
All right.
So the idea was you kidnap somebody and you drug them so they're out, right? And it needs to be drugs. You can't like knock them out.
Sure.
And then you basically cover their entire body with some sort of like Novocaine or whatever, so they can't feel anything in their skin. And you put them in a neoprene suit, and then you put them in a sensory deprivation tank, so no sight, no sound, nothing. But they have to be able to breathe, so it's sort of a helmet sort of situation. And there's a microphone and a headset built into it, and a way to breathe, obviously, otherwise you'd die because you're underwater. And I think you're actually somehow sunken slightly, so you're actually kind of tethered to the ground, kind of, so you can't get out. But a big enough space where you can't feel anything. There's nothing to touch really. And then you wake up, and you're in this complete void where there's no sound. You can't feel your skin. You can't really feel anything. You're just kind of free floating body.
It's a full disassociation.
Full disassociation. And the idea is if you're religious even a little bit, you'll think you've died.
Yeah.
And so they'll leave you in there for like a day or whatever. And then they basically say one word, confess. And now you think you're in purgatory. And you're like, oh, geez, I better like get it all out, right? Every single last detail of anything you can think of that you've ever done that's bad, you start spilling your guts.
See that?
And so they just gather it all up. And then when they're done, they're like, great. And they just let you out on the street with 0 bumps or bruises on you. And you're completely fine. I mean, I think if people don't think super realism is a thing, I think they're just not being creative enough. I think that is the power of, just a little bit of trickery of your eyes. Your senses just get a little bit numbed or feel a little bit different than you might expect. And you might truly believe that you've died, or that you're in some place, or that you can jump, off buildings because you're the guy in the Matrix or whatever. And I think that's something worth thinking about. I don't think people realize that they can be that gullible, that even spies can be that gullible.
Yeah. Well, I believe it. So the reason why we created VRT, so the virtual reality therapy stuff, is I actually live in a partially dissociative state because of multiple head traumas. So
that explains a lot.
Yeah, right.
You.
It does, doesn't it? For me, what they did was, the typical, we're going to put you on medication and deal with this, and it became, a spiraling issue where at the end of it, I was like, I don't feel any better. I still feel, semi-dissociative. Basically, it feels like I'm in a dream-like state a lot. And so, how do I make this to where it's better for other people? How do I make a world where, if you have a fear and phobia, because a lot of people do become disassociative. A lot of people have issues where it starts affecting their life. What can I do to kind of help out? So a lot of things that we've done has been because, the world sucks. Like, how do you make it a little bit better for some other people?
All right, so we said we're going to talk a little bit about the metaverse.
Sweet.
So I think this is a nice way to
mean
round
Web3,
out the
right?
show. Yeah, why don't so the two that I'd heard of was Sensorium, Galaxy, and Meta, but I'm sure there's 100 now.
Yep.
So why don't you give me your opinion? Where is that going, and how's it doing? It seemed like it was a big explosion of people talking about it, and then a quick die off. And I don't really hear anyone talking about it at the moment.
I will say I've legitimately had someone ask me if Mark Zuckerberg invented the metaverse.
Oh.
And I was like, definitely not.
Oh, it was your chance. You could have led them astray with this BS we're talking about.
I mean,
Our Lord and Savior, Mark.
This was a real life
Abraham
interaction.
Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln and Mark Zuckerberg. They got in their way back machines.
Colluded in their time machine, yeah.
Oh, shoot.
Holy moly. Yeah, no. That's actually fascinating to me that people are like so detached from reality. That being said, this is my world, so I'm like, oh yeah, you didn't know that was like actually factually not a thing at all. It's bizarre to me. I look at the metaverse really as just like a bucket of technology, to be honest. It really is about the culmination of human experience, that is fantasy and reality smooshed together in one like sort of virtual experience. I personally look at virtual as any device that we're interacting with. So it could be augmented reality, could be virtual reality, could be a headset, a computer, a phone. It doesn't really matter. It could be a billboard, right? There's ways that we consume digital content every single day. And those are all virtual reality to some extent, or augmented reality, right? So the way that I think this is really going right now is that the magic of the metaverse, right, is it's this decentralized, wondrous land where everything is interconnected. That is like so far from real at the moment.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is built in silos, right?
Yep.
We have our individual singular platforms that do not play nicely with other platforms. We have our Facebook Horizons and our Sandbox and our Fortnite. All these are variations of the metaverse. Some of them are more work-oriented. Some of them are more play-oriented. We're going to see a convergence. There are some technical infrastructure pieces that need to happen in order for those things to all work well together. And we actually are working specifically on a solution right now for a file type that is like a vector for 3D. So it makes the file itself really small, 0.5 megabyte, and it actually balloons onto whichever platform you're putting it on. So you get the highest resolution you possibly can for 3D visual content on any platform.
That sounds really promising.
Oh, yeah.
So that you could run on a phone.
Yes.
You could run on anything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the whole point is you have to meet the consumer where they're at. I don't think VR headset adoption is going to magically turn over tomorrow, right?
Mm.
I don't think AR smart glasses are going to be available widely and adopted widely in the near future, right? Again, we come back to all those like hardware sourcing issues.
Mm.
Ultimately, we have places that we're all going every single day where we're consuming things, we're interacting, and the fundamental is communication. We're all looking for communication, whether it is communication with something that we're a fan of, an artist, whether it is communication with our family. That is really my perspective on it. I think it is that like alphabet soup of acronyms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your AR, VR, MR, XR, AI, IoT, ML, CV, blockchain, crypto. Don't forget those.
Oh, I would never.
Or we can just talk about Internet 3.0. I mean, that's the easiest way of looking at it. If anybody remembers Internet 1.0, just text on a screen. Internet 2.0 is kind of where we live. You can
JavaScript.
attach with your cell phone. You can, you can do JavaScript. Maybe you can do some Flash Player
Ajax.
stuff.
Yeah.
Ajax.
I have a lot of problems with these terms, but
I'm fine with that. And then Web 3 or Internet 3.0 is a much better term since Web 3 has been adopted by, you also need crypto involved.
Mm-hmm.
It just means that you can engage with a website or the web itself how you want to. Whether you have a VR headset, AR headset, you have your cell phone, you have a computer, you want to be able to walk around, you want to look at the shoes on your feet, you want a hat, they're all of these different kind of combinations. And I think the biggest thing that you get out of it is consumer choice. I want to be able to make sure, because I have big feet, just so you know, size 14. But in some shoes it's size 13.
some
But
people
I
don't brag about these things. But
yeah, every day. And so like I have to try on shoes, or there's a pretty good chance I'm not going to be able to wear them. And so like if I didn't have to go to a store and do that, hell yeah, I'm going to do that. I hate going to stores. I don't, whether it's, the Karen who's screaming at the customer service person because she's had nothing better to do with her whole life, or the fact that I have to drive there and, try to entertain my children the entire time. It's just not pleasant, so being able to engage with the internet how I want to, I think is extremely important for everyone.
Agreed. All right. So how do people follow you? How do they find you on the old internet?
The old internet.
Yeah, the old
Not the new internet.
No, I don't want to go into VR space.
Web 2.
In the metaverse. Now, modtechlabs.com. We have our app available on the App Store, iOS or Android, the Mod 3D scanner.
Mm-hmm.
And you can follow us on socials, ModTech Labs, on most of the major channels. I myself, you reach out to me on LinkedIn, Alex Porter.
Great.
Same here. You'll also find me under Tim Cool Mode basically everywhere. That's my typical handle. So, yeah.
Well, Tim, Alex, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for
Been
having us.
wonderful.
Yeah.